Welcome to the Recovery.com podcast. I'm Dr. Mala, editor-in-chief at Recovery.com, and today I'm joined by my fellow host, Cliff McDonald, Chief Growth Officer at Recovery.com. Hi, Cliff.
Hi, Dr. Mala. It's great to be here with you and with you too, Leah.
Thank you. Today, we're excited to be joined by Leah Hall, a recovery advocate, songstress, and national outreach coordinator at IPONO, a residential eating disorder treatment center in Maui. With over 7 years of experience in mental health and a personal journey through mental health herself, as well as trauma and substance abuse issues, Leah now uses her voice and her story to inspire hope and show that recovery is attainable, all while mothering her two boys and actively participating in her church's worship team in Orlando, Florida. Welcome, Leah.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Of course, of course. So, why don't we just start with having you walk us through your journey to sobriety and some of those first steps that you took to start that journey?
It was a very long journey, I will tell you. I struggled for many, many years with a lot of trauma. I grew up in a very chaotic household. There was many years of sexual trauma, emotional abuse, mental abuse, all the things. And I grew up in a household where drugs and alcohol were very prominent. And it was a means and a ways to celebrate. It was a means and a ways to grieve. It's how we handled pretty much everything.
Mm.
My father was a severe alcoholic. And so when my mother, both of her parents died by the time that she was 15 years old.
Mm.
So neither one of them really knew how to be parents. And so I think that I grew up in a household where everybody lived in survival mode. With that, my very first memory of as a child, I was 5 years old and I was sexually molested. I held that memory in for 20 plus years. So
Mhm.
as a child, when you harbor in a memory of that caliber, something to that extent for so many years, of course, I'm going to find ways and means to channel all of that in different ways. And usually it was through negative means, right? I then got into drugs and alcohol at an early age. I acted out in many different ways as well. I suffered a lot of different traumas. Also, I did lose a child at 20
Mm.
years old. My father ended up passing away from the disease of addiction. He died from cirrhosis of the liver when I was 21 years old.
Wow.
And I was in a severely abusive relationship with my kid's father. So after all of that happened, my addiction spiraled and I ended up on a path down a very dark road. And I didn't tell anybody about what had happened to me as a child until after the man that had done that had passed away. So 20 plus years of all of that. And then I finally told somebody, but the years of damage had already been there. I had my second child when I was 27 years old with my kid's father as a means to try to salvage something that was already pretty dead and it wasn't meant to be salvageable. And after I had my second child, it was off to the races. I was
Mm.
miserable. I found my addiction. I became into a very, very dark place until I felt the presence of God pull me. It started to pull me. And I can't really describe it in a means of like something that somebody would really comprehend per se. It was just this overwhelming feeling of like something bigger than me with me. It started to pull me like into different institutions and it tried to get me clean. And at the time, I don't know that I necessarily wanted to because I was so full of so much guilt and so much shame and so much self hatred that I really just felt like I didn't deserve to be alive anymore.
Oh my
And I
goodness.
really thought that I was better off dead than being here. I thought my children were better off without me. I thought the world was better off without me. And so, even though I could feel God's will was trying to pull me into a recovery life, I didn't want it.
Mm.
And so, for 2 years, I fought that. I fought that very hard until eventually I couldn't fight anymore. And I came to a point of surrender. And I remember being in the bathroom one day and I had enough. And I remember crying out to God and begging God and just take it away from me.
Yeah.
I lived in the bathroom. I lived in the bathroom. Like the insanity of using substances, the getting, the using, the finding, like it consumes your entire life and there is
Mhm.
nothing else that you can do. And so I had finally reached that point of surrender and I begged God to please take it away from me. And it was several months after that that there was some means of which God sent some resources to intervene. I prefer not to go into much detail about that, but there was some resources that intervened, and through that, it started me onto a recovery journey. I was reluctant to do that, still believing deeply that I just was not worthy. And that's been the majority of what the last 8 years has been for me, is really doing a lot of soul searching, a lot of deep therapy, trauma work. I do so much different work and different recovery outlets, like to heal myself, but also to make sure that I'm helping others,
Hmm.
on that
Hmm.
journey, because that's probably been the greatest gift that I've received in my recovery, is gaining back self-esteem, believing that I have value today, feeling comfortable in my own skin, realizing like what happened to me is not necessarily my fault, but it was a very lost child running around in survival mode with tons of pain and trauma and grief. And her only means of dealing with it was to act out or to numb it. And that was all I knew how to do. And so trying to find grace and love for that part of me has really been the journey that I've been on for the last almost 8 years now.
Mm. So many layers that you explained. I mean, the one also that I'd love to dive into is you were dealing with this as you were becoming a new mother, and you layer on the aspects of postpartum with that. And how did you navigate that? What did that look like? What were some of the narratives that you were confronting?
I mean, becoming a new mom, when I felt so undeserving, I think that I just believed deeply that I wasn't a good mother. I didn't deserve to have children, and that they would be better off with anybody but me. Honestly, like I didn't.
Mm,
This is emotional stuff. I'm
it's
sorry.
okay. It's okay. It's okay that it is. It needs
Yeah.
to be. It's part of it. It's part of the journey.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to jump
Hmm.
in. Leah, I'm someone in long term recovery as well. And what I see and hear and feel, like, this is intense
Hmm.
and it's
Yeah.
inspiring. And you are so resilient,
Mhm.
and there is a plan for you. It's magical that I don't know how many people who have been, and we know this much of it, right? But it's a lot.
Yeah.
We know it's a
Yeah.
lot. And you were dealt a lot of really difficult hands. I started drinking when I was 13. I didn't get sober until I was 47.
Mhm.
And I thought I lived a functional life. I kind of did, I kind of didn't. But I had a kind of sudden, spectacular spiritual thing, a little bit like
Mhm.
you. And we do love to focus on the solution, right? We are Recovery.com. You are in recovery. Was that thing, you remember a time, a moment when you felt a higher power?
Absolutely.
Had you been in like 12 step programs when that happened, or was it? Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that because it sounds like something significant happened and then the path changed from there. Is that
Yep,
fair?
absolutely. So I feel like, so before that happened, I had never really ever heard of 12 step recovery, which is crazy because with my father growing up that way, you'd think that I had heard of it, but I wish that he would have found recovery himself, but he never did. I do remember an active addiction when I had a police officer one time come to me and he asked me, or we were having a conversation, and he said, well, why don't you find any friends, any like good friends that aren't using or whatever? I was like, well, where do you find those at? I was like, the only friends I have are either the ones that want to use me for drugs or whatever. I said, or I have the friends that I grew up with who don't want anything to do with me. He's like, well, have you ever thought of going to NA or a 12 step meeting? And I was like, I scoffed at it back then because I was like,
Mm,
whatever. When I remember a week later, that police officer, he brought me, he had printed out, I want to say steps 1 through 3
mm,
in this like ginormous like stack of papers, and he printed them out and he brought it to me. And I wasn't ready at the time, but I remember he brought that to me and I kind of threw it to the side. I call it like an awakening. When I felt that encounter with God, it was like an awakening happening. And I feel like that happened right before that. So that was probably God starting to try to like introduce it to me. But if I'm being very transparent, it wasn't until I was court ordered to go to NA that I
mm,
actually started going to NA, and now I'm very much involved in my 12-step program. I sponsor 7 women. I have a sponsor. I've worked steps several times. It's a huge part of my recovery.
Yeah.
I would not be who I am today. My higher power works through everything, really. It works through people, it works through circumstances, it works through pain, it works through the police, it works through employment and conversations. And but yeah, without a 12-step programming, I don't know that I would have ever been able to make it, because that's the foundation that I needed, that community of people just like me. So I
Yeah.
didn't feel like an outcast. Because a lot of addicts, we walk around and feel like nobody gets it. Nobody will ever understand who we are, where we come from. Nobody could ever be as awful as I am. But then you meet a whole bunch of people who have done just as much as you have, if not worse. So they have a story to tell that's 20,000 times worse than yours, and you're like, oh, okay, these are my people. I found my tribe. I think more than anything, it relieves some of that, or alleviates some of that shame for the things, when you realize like you're not so special in that aspect. Like, the disease is rampant. It runs all over the place because it really is a spiritual disease. I do feel like the awakening came right before that. And as soon as that happened, that's when that police officer came and brought me that booklet, and I'll never forget it. And I wish I knew his name today, because I would have went back and like let him know what that meant to me. And I don't know
Mm.
who he is, but yeah.
You are certainly paying it forward.
Mm-hmm.
I had the same similar, you said these are my people.
Mm-hmm.
I had a breakthrough, I remember too, when I grew up in Boston. I don't have that strong of a Boston accent anymore, but I wasn't getting it, and I wasn't doing the work, and I thought I was terminally unique. I'm different, I'm whatever. And a guy who's really helped me a lot, his name's Robbie. He was working at the sober living house where I stayed for a while, and he was frustrated with me
Mm-hmm.
because I think he thought I could get it, and he knew I was a father and I had had a good career, and I think he thought I could live an impactful life. And he was frustrated, and he said, he's a little bit older than me, and a lot of guys in Boston, they say kid, and he's like, kid, I got to tell you something. You are nothing but a effing garden variety alcoholic. And with a strong Boston accent, a garden variety. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you're just the same
Yep.
as any and all of us, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't matter where we're from, or what color we are, or gender, or sexual preference, or whatever. Like, you're in this group,
Yep.
and once you just accept that you're one of that, like, it's gonna, and that was like, boom, like you said, these are my people.
Mm-hmm.
And Leah, did anyone ever tell you, like, it's amazing you made it, like, as far as you did and as long as you did, right, on both sides, the family trauma, the intergenerational
Mm-hmm.
trauma,
Mm-hmm.
right? So is there a degree of this, we have one day at a
Mm-hmm.
time, but do you get excited that maybe you're ending a cycle?
Mm.
I was going to say that a minute ago, a generational thing. Absolutely. I mean, it's gone on for decades and decades. I was thinking about that the other day. I was asked to tell my story at a meeting, and I just started thinking back about like everything and where we come from as addicts, our real story from day one, and how did I get here? It wasn't by like happens. It was a lot of hard work. Recovery is a lot of hard work. And I had to break generational curses. I really had to go in there and do some deep work to change behaviors, mindsets. And I'm so grateful. And I couldn't help but be like, elated by thinking about how much hard work I put in, because the recovery process, like between the emotional
Yeah.
piece, the physical piece, the perceptions, the deep core, just core beliefs of who we think we are, in changing all of that. I mean, it's some hard work, and I can't help but be like really grateful that I am one of the chosen ones to come out of that. I don't know how, and I don't know why, because we're losing so many of our loved ones and our family members out
Mm-hmm.
there
Mm-hmm.
daily to this disease. And I don't understand why me, but very easily I was one use away from my last breath.
Mm.
And for whatever reason, God chose to keep me here. I'll continue to do whatever I can to advocate for recovery and for second chances, and just that there is a better way to live.
I'm so glad that you are here. Yeah, I know we are very glad that you are here.
Thank
And one of the things that you're talking about here is the importance of authentic connections that we
you.
can make through this journey. Could you expand on how these relationships have shaped your journey and maybe some pivotal moments, especially as you're building a community? Because we go from that place, you go from that place of feeling isolated and alone,
Mm.
and then realizing that you have that tribe. So, how did you make that transition? What were some of those impactful, authentic connections that you made? And what advice would you have for people who are starting the journey and feeling alone?
Yeah. That was not an easy thing at all, because I think that after years of using, you really learn to build protective layers. The
Yeah.
survivalist in me has walls built, walls upon walls, where you're not getting close. And those walls come with masks, right? And
Mhm.
layers of masks. And so, for many of the earlier years of recovery, it was a very surface level of relationships until I felt comfortable enough with myself to allow a layer to come off, and for a little bit more of myself to be a little more authentic and a little more. So, it took years of, I think, more so than anything, for me to feel comfortable with my authentic self and who I really am, in order for me to then feel vulnerable with other people, to allow them to get that close to me too. Because in all reality, when you live in active addiction, like, the world really isn't safe. You do have to kind of like watch your back. And so when you live like that all the time, you're having to constantly watch your back. People steal from you. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Like, it is an insanity cycle. You do have to live in survival. You do have to be protective. And then when you come on the other side of that and the world isn't like that anymore, and you learn to trust people again, which was something that I
Mm. Yeah.
also had to relearn, was that
Mhm.
people can be trustworthy. Then that also too, as soon as I started to feel safe with other people, then I also allowed walls to come down. So it was more
Mhm.
so as a matter of feeling safe with myself, and then finding certain people that I could feel safe with. That doesn't mean everybody is safe enough to be completely vulnerable with. And that was another thing I had to learn too, is that everybody doesn't need to know everything,
Mhm.
right? Because in the beginning I'm like, oh, I just need to be honest about it with everybody, and that's not true, because some people will prey upon that. Vulnerability is a great thing to have, but it's also really good to have boundaries. It's good to have, like, to stand up for yourself in certain ways. So any advice I would have is, honestly, it really just starts within. And for me, it was just soul searching, a lot of step work, finding out who I am, clearing out the clutter, certain situations, certain people. Like I said, I had to realize, like, people pleasing, trying to fit in with everybody else, that was really, like, not helping me to feel safe, because then I'm
Yeah.
trying to fit in with people that I don't fit in with. And
Mhm.
again, like, being able to stand up for myself, what matters to me, my morals, my opinions, they
Yeah.
matter. And then my circle of people, they align with that. And that's okay for people if we don't agree. You're like, I'm not going to fit in with you because you say I should feel this way or believe that way, and I don't. And that's okay though. Whereas before, I'd be so concerned if somebody liked me or didn't like me. And I feel like that's part of one of the best gifts of my recovery, though, is finding who I am and knowing that it's okay to be exactly that. I
The
don't have.
relationship with yourself. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
Mhm.
relationship with myself is the most important gift I've gotten of recovery, I think, overall. Of course, my relationship with God, and then my relationship with self.
Mhm. Mhm. Wonderful.
Leah, did you have so you've been hurt a lot,
Mhm.
and we learned that there's so many sayings in the rooms, right? Hurt people hurt people. Some are sicker than others. Did your recovery change when you were able to acknowledge that the people that had hurt you, whether intentionally or not, were sick?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Right? Was that kind of game changing for you, right? And it
Mm.
wasn't you, right? Like it's. I know it's helped a lot of people that have had severe trauma, and I think you're in that category. I think you qualify.
Mhm.
And did you get clinical, like, did you get professional help, like Dr. Mala can help guide us through things like that? Did you get those types of resources to help you to understand all of that and somehow find peace with all that hurt and that pain?
Yeah, I've done a lot of therapy, but I think that a lot of that came from step work, if I'm being very honest, when I started doing like a step 8 and 9. When you start realizing, so I did a step 8 with my mom. And a step 8 is where we make a list of the amends we need to make. A step 9, we make the amends. And my mom was on that list, right? And when I sat down with my mom and I apologized to her for the things I had done to her, and I was like, well, How did that make you feel when I didn't come home for days at a time? And my mom told me this was a game changer for me and my whole perspective and everything. She goes, I can't tell you the agony that I felt
Mm,
when you didn't come home, knowing if you were alive or you were dead. She said, I didn't sleep. I couldn't eat. And it was in that instant, that moment, that I realized like all of the resentment, all of the anger that I had towards her for anything that had happened in the past. Like she was human just like I am. She suffered her own trauma, her own pain,
mhm,
and she was hurting. You know what I mean? And instantly my empathy and like instantly turned on in that moment. And I was
mhm.
like, oh my goodness. Like it was a complete game changer, and I'll never forget that moment. It was just an aha, like an awakening moment.
It's
And I
so
think that's it. Like that was it.
it's so good that you could have that with her. That's amazing that you could have that discussion with her, and so beautiful. What a poignant moment. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm.
My goodness. Again, back to those authentic connections. We're talking about connections with yourself, doing steps 8 and 9, which in their own right, very therapeutic as well. And the challenges that you face to get there, right? Did this happen in the first year? Did it happen in the second year? When were you ready for those steps?
So the first time through the steps, I took suggestions. I did like everybody before me told me to do. The predecessors say you get a sponsor, you work the steps, you go to meetings, you do all those things. So I did those things,
Mm,
right? So I went through the motions.
mhm, mhm,
I don't know that I was necessarily at a place, I won't say mentally, but I'll say more so mentally, I was there. I won't say I was there maybe with my whole heart, per
mhm.
se. And I feel like that matters. So from the head to the heart,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Mhm,
So my first time through, I did it. I needed to stay clean. I needed to stay sober. I didn't want to go back to using. I wanted a better way of life. So I went through the motions.
mhm,
It wasn't really until the second time through my steps that I really adhered to what I was doing,
mhm.
what each step meant. And then I was able to really apply them to
Yeah,
daily living. And again, like having that aha moment with my mother
yeah.
in that relationship, I had held on to so much resentment with my mom for years.
Mhm,
And when I realized how much pain I caused her too, like it was very humbling too. It's like,
mhm.
Leah, like you have hurt her just as much as she's hurt you. So can we not just let it go and agree to just love each other and forgive each other?
I'm so glad that you said that you went through it a few
Hmm.
times, right? Cliff, actually, I was gonna ask you too. I mean, what is that experience like? There's no right or wrong number. I know this, but I think for our audience to hear, what does it look like when you're going through it the first time, the second time? Do you feel limitations like you're not doing it right? What does that look like?
I am certainly not an expert and I have so much to learn. And as they say, Leah, more will be
Hmm.
revealed. I love the 12 steps. I think it's absolutely amazing that in 1939, these non clinical dudes who were just so desperate with people dying around them came up with this thing. And Bill Wilson thought that it was divine intervention when he wrote chapter 5, How It Works. He said he felt like his hand wasn't moving on his own
Mm,
power, it was divine intervention. So I think what happens a lot is you get the gift of desperation. That's what my sponsor told me. And you're willing to do anything,
mhm,
right? You're willing to do whatever it takes. Then you're ready to take certain steps. And you kind of do them in like a zombie mode almost, right? Like, so you're just kind of going through it and you're probably still cloudy from all the use and abuse, but you do them. And I think there's these series of breakthroughs and it's really hard.
Hmm.
The prize is only gained by doing the really hard work.
mhm,
Like it's terrifying.
Hmm.
We've been selfish and dishonest and we've been ignoring these things and you have to face them head on. Like the only way is through.
Yes.
And then you learn some things. And I think one of the most amazing things is like steps 8 and 9 force these real human
mhm.
connections.
Yeah.
You're face to face with someone and you're getting real.
Hmm.
We're not good at getting real.
Hmm.
And we're really good at sweeping things under the rug. And usually the recipient of an amend responds in a surprisingly human, compassionate way.
Yeah.
Because I know if Leah is coming to me and saying, "Hey, Cliff, I got to own something, man. Back when I was using, I treated you like crap," and I know that what she's doing is hard.
Mm-hmm.
So immediately I'm like, "Wow, this takes a lot of
Mm-hmm.
courage," and I think that's like disarming, and it brings us
Yeah.
down. So then it enables Dr. Molly. You're talking about the importance of
Mm-hmm.
connection. That's what it
Mm-hmm.
does. And then you get a little taste of that juice, which is so much better than any drink or drug, and you're like, "Wow, this is cool. I'm high on something way better."
Mm.
And then you go back and you do them. So what the way it was explained to me is steps 1 through 9 are ego deflation. 1 through 3 don't require any action.
Mm.
4 through 9 is the action, and that's the real hard work. The ego deflation occurs, and then 10 through 12 we just live there for the rest of our
Mm-hmm.
lives.
Mm-hmm.
But if we get off track, you might want to go back and do 4 through 9 again, because inevitably there's probably some inventory that we didn't address as completely as we should have,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's the way it was explained. Leah, did you hear the
I
same
love
story?
everything that, yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I was
Yeah,
just going to say, I love
yeah,
the breakdown. I think that's so helpful for people to
Mm-hmm.
hear and to reinforce that. And we say this all the time, but I don't think it's fully understood is that this is lifelong and it's okay to weave between those steps as you need to be able to go back to, as you said, Cliff, that inventory that might not have been unpacked, um,
Mm-hmm.
and
yeah.
processed. Yeah. Yeah.
So, boy, we could stay here for
I
a
know.
long time, and we could stay in these different stages. So, is it okay if we pivot a little bit to Leah? Now you're doing this
Yeah.
work,
Yes.
so you are in this industry. How did that happen? How did you end up getting
Yeah.
into this industry and doing this work professionally?
Yeah. It's really funny how I actually my very first job in recovery, it was kind of funny. I was actually serving tables, and I had been asked to do this like taste of Tavares thing, right? This local food thing that they were doing. They asked me to go be the marketer there and go sit out there at the table and whatnot. And next to me was this recovery booth. And I asked the lady, I'm like, "Hey, I'm very interested in getting into recovery work." She's like, "Okay, well, call me." So it ended up working out to me. It's purely divine, I believe. I got into it. I started off it as a behavioral health tech. It was a pretty small recovery group. I did that for some years, did that for like a year and a half, moved on to the director of client services at that particular company. Left there and went to a detox unit, and I did some chemical dependency technician work there. Went from there to another program, which was primary mental health, and we also treated substance use disorder. And I was the intake coordinator there. Moved into several different positions there. So, intake coordinator, business development, admissions coordinator, case management. And I actually still work there. I've been there for 4 years now. And I've landed in that role as the admissions coordinator. So, I do that full time. So, at that job, I met the COO of IPONO, and she introduced me to the job I currently have now as the National Outreach Coordinator for IPONO, which is the eating disorder program located on Maui. So it's been a gift, all of it, all the different positions that I've held. I love recovery. To me, it doesn't matter what we're recovering from, anything to do with recovery and anyone wanting to restore life. Like, I'm all about it.
I love that. That's great.
Mhm.
With all of the things that you're doing there, I know you're really involved with the church. You're
Mhm.
also a mother. How do
Mhm.
you balance the demands of all of it, and how does that fit into your personal recovery journey?
Mhm. Balance is probably something I need to work on. I just make it work. I'm a single mom, and my oldest son, he just graduated from college with his first degree. He plans to go back. He'll be 21 this weekend, actually.
Oh,
And
nice.
then my youngest is 14. He plays baseball, and like my kids are thriving. They're doing very well. I work 6 days a week. I serve at church on most Sundays on the worship team, but I'm passionate about singing and using my voice to hopefully bring people closer to God and just feel the presence of God through me. So that to me doesn't feel like work at all. It's something that I enjoy doing. And then sponsoring 7 women. Luckily, all of my sponsees have over 3 years clean. So it's not that I don't have a lot of newcomers, not that I wouldn't. It works itself out. When
Mm.
I still attend 2 to 3 meetings a week, and I try the best I can to balance all of that. I am very busy. I balance sometimes is hard. I do feel overstretched, but again, like I'm very grateful to be where I'm at today. And I'd rather be busy with positive recovery things and taking care of myself. I think being able to support myself today is also a gift of recovery. Being a single mom with two kids and two jobs and just being able to like, I take care of myself. And that's
Hmm.
something like I'm very proud of that
Yeah.
I've never been able to do that before.
Yeah. Yeah. Music is a significant part of your life for sure.
Mm.
So, how has it played a role in your healing process? Can you share that with us a little bit more?
Music got me through some of the hardest moments of my life. I remember being in certain places and that was all I had. There's something about the therapeutic value of a song. And I'm a very big lyric person. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have to be a particular genre of music, but it's the lyrics that I think matter the most.
Yeah.
I feel them in my soul, you know what I mean? And when it can move me and nothing else around me can really matter. But if I can feel the lyrics in my soul, it just keeps me, I don't know, it keeps me feeling secure, I guess, if you
Yeah.
will, just feeling. And then, of course, just when I feel down and I hear music, like nothing else around me can even matter in the moment. I'm just in the moment.
Mm,
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, music can definitely be cathartic. And I mean, all of what you said kind of like reminds me of just the benefits and of music therapy, right?
Absolutely.
Analyzing, getting
Mhm.
yourself aligned with the lyrics and the movement of the same is so
Mhm.
powerful. So that's great.
Oh, Leah, I was just going to ask actually two things. One, present day, I didn't know that you were, are you a musician, a songwriter, a
I'm
singer?
a singer.
Singer. Yeah.
Oh, cool. What kind of music do you sing?
Right now, I'm a worship leader for church, so I sing
Oh,
at
cool.
church, but I'm very soulful. I like country music, and then I sing a lot of Christian music.
Yeah, I would love to check that out
Y-
for sure.
Journey.
And then, Leah,
Yep.
I was going to ask you, so again, I just think that you're so resilient and I'm inspired by your story and what you're doing today. And you seem like you're in a really, really good place and you just have this air of, I'm good. And I think that's a trust in a higher power.
Mhm.
What were you like before, like all the trauma and the substance use? I love like exploring the inner child, right? And what were we like when we came into this world? You're an artist, you're a singer, you're clearly very smart. What were you like as a kid?
Mhm. When I was little, I used to love to write poetry. I was a cheerleader. So I did competitive cheerleading for 8 years. I played clarinet in middle school.
Ah, so did I. Yeah.
Mhm. I played clarinet and I made straight A's. I was always on the honor roll.
Mhm.
I did a lot of those things without my parents like really being super supportive. So I did them like because I wanted to.
Mhm.
And I think that after so long, like you do all these things as a child and you just really want your parents, you want daddy to be so proud of you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Mhm.
after years of not really getting that, like my mom, I think I cheered for 8 years. And I want to say my mom probably came to 5 events that I did, including competitions and games and things. And after so long, you just feel like as a child, you don't get that. So I had all of these like hopes and dreams, and like I wanted to go to college and be a dental hygienist. And I think somewhere along the line, I just kind of gave up. And I found drugs and alcohol to be a much easier way to just numb everything, and I didn't have to feel anymore. But I remember just, I was very creative when I was little. I loved to play pretend. Before I became a cheerleader, I would go out and we lived up in Georgia when I was like in the second grade and they had bamboo trees.
Mm.
And I would pull the bamboo leaves off and I'd sit out there and I'd pretend like they were pom poms and I would just like all kinds of just make believe stuff. I was very intuitive, very imaginative. And like I said, over time, somehow that just started to go away. So I will also say that my recovery has reawakened my creativity.
It sure
Yeah.
has.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It sure has.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to guess. I was going to guess that you were really smart, that you were really involved, that you were, and this is common,
Mhm.
right? The high achieving people
Mhm.
pleaser. Amanda couldn't be with us today. She's on our team here. She's our chief of staff. Very, very similar story. Unbelievable student, dancer,
Mhm.
right? Everything is right. And she's a recovering alcoholic now. I do think that And I love alcoholics. I feel so comfortable being in a room full of these people because they're lovers, right? They're
Yes.
empaths and they are passionate.
Hmm.
And I think what happens a little bit is like we get disappointed in the world
Mm,
Mm.
because there isn't that much love.
Yeah.
And right now the Olympics are on and it's awesome. Like all these countries come together and you see everyone having peace
Hmm.
and celebrating this common thing that we're all doing. And it's beautiful
Hmm.
and it's wonderful. And I forgot how much I love watching it with all these different countries and people. And we're the
yeah,
same, we're all
yeah.
together.
Hmm.
But I come away from it like, why can't it just be like this all
Oh
the
my gosh,
time?
I know. Cliff, I'm just gonna sneak in there and say, like,
No, please
such a
do.
good testament to the fact that peace is possible, right? We can do this. We can make this happen. Anyway, I just had to
It's
say that. Go ahead.
no, I think that, and I think what happens is like that's how we come into the
Mm-hmm.
world. You watch 3-year-old kids; they meet a stranger, they're best friends
Mm-hmm.
right away, and they're kind and helpful, and they give and all this. And I think we learn
Mm-hmm.
to be selfish
Yep.
and to be cruel and to be hurtful. And I
Yeah.
think for a lot of really highly sensitive people, empaths, people pleasers, you get to some point, you're pushing, you're pushing, you're pushing. Why isn't and all the other parents are at the games? Like why? Like
Mm-hmm.
and at some point, you're like, all right, man, not I'm going to quit, but I'm going to seek relief in a different way. And it's easier and it's more effective in the short term. That's such a common path.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think you discovered it's all artificial. Like drugs and alcohol, it's not real,
Hmm.
it's fake,
Hmm.
right? And we're being sold something, and that doesn't end well, as we know. But then you rediscover something more authentic.
Yeah.
And that's what I see and hear and feel, Leah, with you. And now you get to help other people achieve that. So, as the national outreach
Hmm.
coordinator, so does that mean you're building relationships with people that might be able to introduce potential people that you can help with your facilities?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's all about
Okay.
relationships, really. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you get to keep track of those people getting help of their journey? Do you get to witness that, or are you kind of separated from that?
I'm separated from that. I do wish I got to see more of that, but my role specifically here, I don't get to see that as much,
Mm.
fortunately.
So, are you working with primary care physicians? Are you what does that look like? That
Hmm.
I think I know what that role is, but
Hmm.
I'd love to hear how it works for you.
Yeah. So primarily, I reach out to either other treatment centers, other people in this similar role to mine, like outreach coordinators, maybe therapists, doctors. It really just depends who other like partial hospitalization programs, something like that. Somebody that we could have a working relationship with because we're a residential level of care. So whomever, dietitian, something like that, whomever we could have a working relationship with that might refer to a residential level of care for eating disorders.
What is your experience with the cooperation and collaboration that you get from other providers?
So far, I've found it to be fairly easy, I guess,
That's
as far
great.
as getting to see them, to meet them, to have these like great Zoom meetings. I've had not really any issue with that. Referral piece of that sometimes can be a little more difficult because I know a lot of times they'll have working relationships with people that they've probably been working with for many, many years. And so sometimes it does take several different meetings or different meetings to get to know people better. Maybe sending a patient through our program so that they know like what they're getting, before they send more people or refer more people to our program.
That's great. And you do get ample opportunity to witness and be a part of the personal journeys with, I think you said the 7 women that you're sponsoring.
Hmm. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah.
That's, you do have a lot on your plate.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I want to go back to what we were talking about also. I just had another thought, which was it's so good that you've been able to get back to the creativity, the creative elements that definitely were forms of expression for you, but also you're speaking from your soul when you engage in them. I often think, and I want to hear from both of you, what your thoughts are is like, you build on the trauma and then sometimes it's easier to take yourself out of the things that gave you that peace, because that goodness, the light that came from them, becomes hard to accept. So diving into whatever the substance is, numbing out, as you've said, becomes easier, and you disconnect from the element that was creatively bound, that helped you express, because that becomes so difficult. And you
Mm-hmm.
finally were able to find that again. And now removing that layer, right? Removing the numbness that comes, or the need to potentially escape, you're able to connect with that part of yourself again, that creative aspect of yourself. How scary was that, to realize that it was safe to rebuild that creative relationship, that outlet once again?
It was scary to change my normal coping skills, period. You know
Mm,
what I mean? Because
mhm,
my only way to cope with anything was to numb. And
mhm,
for many years, I would probably self-sabotage in many different ways because that was all I knew. And so
mhm,
it took many years of practice of applying different coping skills, like instead of wanting to numb with something, pulling out a pen and paper and writing a poem until I continued to use it as a practice of coping. Anything out of my normal coping skill of using or cutting and running was completely terrifying
mm,
because I didn't want to feel. I
mhm.
didn't want to believe that I was great. I didn't want to
Yeah,
believe that I was better than this horrible version that I really believed that I was. It took a lot of deep work to really feel that I was anything other than that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Dr. Carl Jung, who was involved with the creation of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, there was a guy named Roland Hazard who was a really successful American businessman who couldn't get sober. And he went overseas to Switzerland and he spent a year with Dr. Jung. And Dr. Jung psychoanalyzed him for 1 day a week for 52 weeks. And Dr. Jung is all about the collective unconscious, and he's a humanist, right? And we have this common experience, like the hero's journey kind of comes from him. His theory was that those of us using drugs and alcohol were seeking a spiritual experience
mhm,
Mhm.
mhm,
in a
Mhm.
really, really ineffective manner, right? Like it is mind altering. And it's really interesting now that they're treating like real
yeah,
trauma, right? Victims PTSD with
mhm,
psychedelics,
mhm,
Mhm.
right? Which is really controversial as well. But as far as the link with like creativity, one of the biggest myths is that really creative people are better by using drugs and alcohol.
Mhm.
That does not work,
yeah,
right? But like I think there might be people that are really masters and they've been doing it so long that they can have a few drinks and still perform fairly well or whatever it is. But when the lights come back on and your brain recovers, it's a brain
mhm,
disease,
mhm,
and the connections start forming again and they're stronger and the whatever it is, like it's amazing. It really is like a rebirth.
Yeah.
mhm,
But like I get this whole new life and the way I think is differently and I see differently and I feel differently, and it's hard to explain that, but it's absolutely wonderful. I
mhm,
think that's what you see, people that really thrive in recovery and they're like far and away living their best lives, and you look at their
yeah,
accomplishments and you look what Stephen King is a recovered alcoholic,
mhm,
Mhm.
and he says, I did some work when I was younger, but the quality of my work, it's so different,
mhm, mhm,
right? And you see people that once they get the way I look at it, I'm sorry I'm rambling a little bit, but like I didn't know I had a monkey on my back.
mm,
I resisted it for a long time, and then finally you accept and you surrender, and then you do a little bit of work and you're like you feel liberated, and then over time it wasn't a monkey, it wasn't a chimpanzee, it was like a silverback gorilla.
Yeah.
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 You realize the weight of it.
So,
Yeah, yeah, the true
Mhm.
burden.
and Dr. Mala, I was an athlete,
Mhm,
right? I was not the creative
mhm.
type.
Well,
I was told that, which is horrible, by the way, right? Like you're not the
oh
creative
my
type.
gosh. No.
Yeah, and you know, and I wrote a book
Mhm,
this year,
mhm,
right? That I started 15 months ago, and that never ever would have happened
Mhm.
without being recovery. Leah, you're not singing and leading your worship group, right? If you're not in recovery, no
There's
way.
no way.
mhm,
Mm-mm.
No, I know we're short on time and we're approaching the end. Leah, what do you want to do with your music?
Hmm. Oh boy. I don't know that I have an in game goal in mind per se, right? I enjoy what I'm doing now, but do I know what platform that God has me on in the long run? I don't really know. I don't really know. I want to do whatever will serve God, and whatever that looks like. It could be bigger than what I'm doing now. I honestly don't know. I know that
Well, I
like singing is my passion,
Yeah.
right? Like my
yeah,
passion
yeah.
for song. And as long as it's something I'm singing it from my heart and from my soul, I don't ever want to be put in a box. Because that too, and I do know sometimes the church can kind of like, I feel like you could feel like you're in a box.
There's no doubt it's soulful.
Yeah.
No, we know that. And your attraction to the lyrics, and you're a poet.
Yeah.
That someone singing recovery songs. So we had a guy on the podcast a couple weeks ago. Griffin House is his name. He's one of us. He's in recovery, and he's a singer songwriter, like a professional. And I haven't listened to his music yet, but I'm going to, because I bet we're going to find, even if he doesn't know it, recovery messages in there.
Oh
Mm,
yeah, for sure.
So I could see you doing that, Leah, and I'm sure that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
I
I
would
mean,
love.
one of the first things that I think about is that moment you've done all the work and you get to that place where you're holding the mic for the first time and you have that moment of like, why am I doing this? But then you have the answers. My suspicion is you had the answers and you answered yourself and you said, no, I do know why I'm doing this. And how liberating that must be,
Absolutely.
you know?
Absolutely. I remember staring at the TV one time, and I was still like just early recovery. And I was watching this girl leading worship, and I was like enamored by this lady. I'm like,
Mm,
I want to do that.
mhm.
And I did. 2 years later, I was up on the stage and I was doing that. And I was terrified because I was so uncomfortable in my skin. But like today, I get up there and I lead with this fierce passion because I believe in God and I believe in myself. And I know that like He gives me, I have all the ability in me because I didn't fight through hell to be here today, to
Mhm.
just be timid,
Yeah.
to be, fearful. Whatever God's got for me, it's going to be grand, and I know it, and I'm here for it.
I love that. I love that. And I do want to add to Cliff, I do believe that athletes are artists
Yeah.
because there is an art to your game. There's an art to whatever it is that you've got to execute as an athlete. I've worked with a lot of athletes. My husband's fought in the ring. I know that same fear, again, like going back to that moment of holding the mic the first time, whether it's that or whether you're standing at the door of the octagon and going, what am I doing? And then you do it. And then, regardless of the result, it's something that you did. It's something that you were able to utilize as the ability to express yourself and reinforce your strengths. I think that's a beautiful thing. Yeah. All right. So we always land on our last question, which is, what does recovery mean to you?
Mm. Recovery just means life to me. I mean, it is literal life restored. I was a dead person walking around, and because of my recovery, I am reborn. I have a life that I actually get to live today. I don't take that lightly. I think as that little girl running around with a very lost little girl, a very pained little girl trying to be an adult. I feel like the gift of just having hope,
Mm-hmm.
having a restored life, being employable, being able to grow up and be a parent to myself that I never got to have.
Yeah,
Recovery just means life to me.
I love it. And I'll
Hmm.
also add to that, you're breaking cycles. Like Cliff mentioned, you're giving that to your boys as well. And that's such a beautiful thing. You're giving it to the community, and it's such a beautiful thing to see. So thank you for everything that you're doing.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. All right, Cliff.
It was so great to meet you, Leah. I'm inspired. Thanks for
Yeah,
sharing, and thanks for doing the work you're doing. I'm excited to keep seeing the work you're doing.
yeah,
Thank,
So thank you.
yeah.
thank you so much. I appreciate both of y'all. Thank you for having me on
Thank
today.
you.